Hi there. I'm Robin Reneals with the Pacifica Historical Society, and I'm your host for the show today, Footprints of Pacifica. We get together weekly to discover the lore and explore the lore and the lure of lovely Pacifica, its character and characters. The focus of today's show is the Landy family, early settlers in Sharp Park, and our very special guest is Steve Landy, a native of Pacifica and third-generation Landys in America. Hi, Steve. Welcome.
Thank you, Robin. I really appreciate you having me.
Thank you very much. I've been close to the Landy family ever since I first came to Pacifica in the 70s, and I was actually a neighbor of your grandmother's and your uncle, Charlie. So I have a few stories of my own to share, but of course what I really want to hear is the very early days of your grandfather and your grandmother when they came, and the family, and all the great stories that you want to share. So go ahead.
Sure. I guess the story of the Landys really is a story of the great immigration from Europe in the late teens and 20s. So you want to talk about when they first got here, I guess?
Yeah, sounds good.
This comes from both my grandfather and grandmother, the oral history they shared with me when I was a little kid. And Grandpa Francesco got here in probably 1920, 21. ahead of my grandmother. And he was in San Francisco, North Beach area, trying to forge a living there, I guess, get something going like so many other immigrants. That area was largely Italian, Portuguese, and Basque. He was here about a year before Grandma finally got on a boat in Viareggio, and this story comes from her. It was a challenge for her to get her passage with Renato. We called him Uncle Charlie. Renato in her arms. He was about 2.5, 3 years old. She had her pass, her lottery ticket to get on board, and the official that kept signing people on, letting them on board, kept turning her away. About the third time, she had noticed people handing this gentleman money and basically cutting her and several other people off their passage to America. And in true Margarita fashion, she challenged this gentleman, said, "I see people hand you money. If you don't let me on that boat, there's a gentleman over there with a machine gun and uniform. I'm going to talk to him about it." He said, "Lady, get on the boat." So she got over here, and the challenge continues. She gets through Ellis Island with Renato. Doesn't speak a word of English, and some of the officials spoke some Italian, some broken Italian. She gets through Ellis Island, and she gets to the train station in New York and needs to come all the way to California via train. And again, she's buying her tickets, and she asks the conductor or somebody who spoke Italian, "How do I know when I'm in San Francisco?" He says, "Lady, when you get to the last ticket, you're in San Francisco." And that's how she got over here.
Wow.
Basically, on a basic wing and a prayer, I would think, at that time, for somebody who had no language skills and didn't know where the heck they were.
And traveling all the way over here to America with a baby in her arms.
Yeah,
That's incredible.
Quite a story.
That's incredible.
So she gets to the Bay Area because actually the train stops in Oakland. There's no bridges at that time. She gets to the city, and the grapevine, they're looking that she's here, and they're passing the word to my grandfather through the local
Italian community.
pipeline.
Yeah.
Your wife's in town looking for you. And he finally gets the word, and they hooked up. Kind of a small comical story there. He had I guess he had a Portuguese girlfriend. This comes from my grandfather. And he told the Portuguese lady, "I have to leave, my wife's here." And God bless him, he wanted to hook up his wife, but the Portuguese lady chased him down Columbus Avenue with a knife and tried to kill him. But fortunately, that didn't happen.
Fortunately, otherwise we wouldn't have much of a
The
discussion
bloodline would have
tonight about
stopped.
Landy.
Yeah, we wouldn't be talking
yeah.
tonight at all. So that
No Landys.
They hooked up, and from there they headed to the Salinas, Castroville area.
So they went south.
Yes.
They got out of town. So.
He blew town, it looked like, yeah.
Yeah. Wow.
And they took up, worked for the Swiss. There were Swiss Italians that still own all those artichoke farms down there. Those are been in their families for generations. They worked those artichoke farms. And that's where my father was born, 1928. She went from the fields to the delivery room. This was what she told me.
Wow. Let's see. And your dad's Lito.
Right.
Renato is Charlie. We know Charlie's
Right.
the oldest, and Charlie lived next door to the house. Your grandparents' house was on Palmetto. That was 20
2256 Palmetto.
2256,
Right.
right. And then Charlie lived next door at 2260?
Correct, yes.
2260.
He was right, the house, yeah, just to the south.
Right, right. So, and then how did they get to Pacifica? Let's talk about that.
Well, my father was born in 1928, so, and he was born in Castroville. And I would think, based on that timeline, because my Uncle John, the youngest, was born in 1931, and he was born in the county here.
Right.
So
they were
sometime
here.
between 28 and 30, they came up here in 31,
All right.
just based on those birth dates. Because I didn't get a lot of really good information from them, or I don't remember it, to be honest, how
Right.
they transitioned.
And they didn't build the house on Palmetto, the original cottage on
No.
Palmetto. So you think that they possibly got sometime into that house sometime in the 30s. And how did they acquire? Did you hear a story about how they acquired the house on Palmetto?
Yes, my grandparents told me they rented a farm, which is right up here in Valleymar. It's that kind of that hillside where there's a floral. Is there still a floral business up there?
I think there are still, yeah.
Yeah, that was all kind of open pasture land, and my grandparents rented that. And they had horses and cows and goats there, I think, based on what I heard.
Yeah.
And at some point, they purchased the Palmetto property for $600 cash and a cow.
Wow.
That was the price of the home.
Sometime in the 30s. And that was approximately 6 acres. Six
That-
acres.
Yeah, that house sat on a pretty good parcel there. It was.
Out to the beach.
Yeah, it went from Palmetto on the north side all the way to the beach, and there was a big, pretty wide lot there. And then we had a lot of land in the back where we had a barn and a chicken coop and like a chicken area.
Yeah.
It was pretty large.
And was there? You remember things growing back there? Was it all being farmed, or was it just their garden? And what
On
was
Pal-
the ground like? Was it because there were sand dunes out there too? So
I remember in Palmetto we had the full chicken area, and we had fig trees, and we grew lettuce, which was easily grown in the sand, and I think some string beans. We had a pretty good little vegetable garden in the back,
yeah.
as I recall as a kid. I used to play back there in that chicken area. It was a lot of fun for a little guy.
Yeah, the animals. That's great. And then at some point, your grandfather opens up one of the first grocery stores, not the first, but a grocery store right next to the house on the north side of the house.
Right.
And it was a building. I had heard the story that it was a building from another contractor in the neighborhood that he bought in San Francisco and had moved out there and placed on the lot.
That would be the store.
And that was the first
Right.
grocery store.
Yeah, my earliest memories of the store were, again, when I was probably like 5 or 6 years old.
Yeah.
And I think by then we had the big store on Francisco Boulevard.
Right, right.
But the store, I know it was raised up, so it would make sense. I was never told how it was
Yeah.
built, but it was raised
yeah.
up on stilts, so that makes sense.
And then there was the one on Francisco, which we were able to research and find that there were advertisements actually published in the paper here at the time that called it the Frisco Market, and advertisements in the paper for that market, or in the early papers. The market now. How did running the markets go? Who in the family worked in the market, and how did that work?
Okay.
Especially when you had two going. They had two going. Do you
Right.
remember?
Well, the one on Francisco, my father ran that store,
Okay,
and my
so-
Uncle John was in that store working
Lito,
as well, the youngest brother.
Lito and John, your youngest.
Right.
uncle.
And they had employees. I know there was a guy working the butcher shop. He'd been there a long time. And I think I had a couple of guys working for him. But I also heard them say that the store existed on the other side of the road at one time, and they moved it. I don't know if that was in the 40s, but that just comes from oral history.
Yeah, yeah,
And then it became Landy's Market.
yeah.
It became Landy's Market on Francisco.
Right. So what I want to do is just show a few pictures.
Sure.
And we talked about the very first store, and this was the first store on Palmetto Avenue, right next to the house.
That's
And this
Francesco
is-
worked there.
This is Francesco Landi. This is Grandpa. And this is him behind the counter at that store.
Right.
And then I'd like to go to another picture. And this is Francesco and Margherita. And can you see who's go ahead and talk about the picture, who's in it.
Yeah, that's my grandmother, Margarita. That's Francesco with the vest. And it looks like it could be Renato in the middle.
Looks like it could be Charlie.
Yeah,
Okay.
could be John too. I mean, all the guys looked alike.
They're very similar at that
Yeah.
age, huh?
Yeah,
Okay.
but it could be Renato.
And then this is a really sweet picture. This is your grandfather. This is
Right.
Francesco Landi. And who's that?
That's yours truly on his back there.
That's Steve?
Yeah.
That's Steve up on his grandfather's shoulders?
Yeah, you know, the nice thing, I was very close to both my grandparents, and I enjoyed them all through
That's
my
great.
childhood and
Yeah.
adulthood.
And then here's a family gathering. The family gathering picture. And I think you're in that one too, aren't you?
I'm the one with the big mouth next to my grandmother's lap there.
Okay.
And from left to right, that's my half-sister Pam and Richard. And then there's Uncle Charlie right there, and that's Aunt Edna. Edna was his first wife. And you can see a table just full of food, which is still a family tradition.
And this was in the cottage, wasn't it?
That was the house, that's
Everybody-
the 2256, yeah, that's the
Yeah.
small house.
And if
So-
anyone happens to go by 2256 Palmetto, you look at the very front of it, and it initially is a very small cottage. So it
Right.
was a lot of family and a lot of love in a very tiny, tiny
Well,
building.
yeah, we had a pretty good sized front room, so we could fit a
Yeah.
long table there.
And then I'll show another family picture here. You might describe who that is.
That's Uncle John.
This is John. And tell
that's
me
it.
a little bit about John.
You know, he was killed in a car accident right out here on Highway 1 in 1961. I was very small. I just remember his persona. He was a very calm individual, and the Landys are not a calm group of folks,
Yeah.
but he always seemed to be the calm one. And I know he fought in Korea. He's in the, I wrote it down somewhere. He was in the 179th Infantry in the U.S. Army Company A, and his unit suffered a heavy amount of casualties over there. So I'm sure he saw some really horrific stuff. And unfortunately, he didn't live long enough to kind of get to see and talk to him about that.
Yeah.
But he was a quiet, soft-spoken person,
Yeah.
as I recall.
That's neat. It's a great family. I'm going to show a picture here, and you might describe who this is.
That's Joe Pesci. No, that's my father and my mom when they got married. I think that reception was at
Nick's.
Nick's, yeah.
Yeah. And they were friends with
They were
Nick,
good friends with the Gus for
with-
many
with
years.
Nick
Yes.
and Lorraine.
Mhm.
Yeah. And then something we haven't talked about yet about your dad is that he was something of a golfer.
Yeah, that was the tournament at Green Hills. It says 1958, and my dad was he's a champion golfer. He was basically a prodigy, just to say the least. He won the city tournament, junior tournament in 1945, I believe, when he was 15. He still has the course record at Sharp Park. He shot a 63 there in 1962. He had the course record at Lake Merced Country Club, and he set that in 1954 in this SF Open playing with professionals. He was playing in his Fruit of the Loom shirt from just getting out of the store. I can't find that picture, but it's a great one of him hitting out of the sand trap at that tournament.
Wow.
He's just wearing a T-shirt. He played with Kerry Middlecoff, Ben Hogan, and all those guys, and he took third place. I still have the watch he won, which is a really kind of a great heirloom for me.
That's great.
But he was a very, very talented player.
This is what you get when you're a kid growing up in Sharp Park and living next to a golf course.
Yeah, he
Yeah.
he went over there as soon as he could carry a golf bag and started caddying and hanging out with the guys and learning how to play. He picked it up pretty fast.
That's great. That's great. Let me also talk about the house just briefly.
Sure.
At some point after your grandmother passed and Charlie and the property was sold, a gentleman that acquired the property was doing remodeling work on it in the 90s. And they received a letter. And I'll just read the letter really quick. And I'm going to read the letter actually, and I'm going to hold the picture up. And first I'll say what the picture is. The picture is of the man and his wife that actually built their house. And the house was built in 1909, and this is Elijah and Mary Hutley. And let me read, this was a letter that was sent to the property owners at that time after the property had been sold. It says, "Dear sirs, I feel odd not having a name, but our daughter said you would like a picture of the man who built the house. Elijah Hutley built this house in 1909 and lived in it with his wife Mary and their 6 children. My husband Donald Hutley is their 5th child. I hope the next time that we are in Pacifica we may find you at home." It's signed by Mary E. Hutley, and at this time she was at 907 Marsh Road, Menlo Park, California. And the letter is postmarked October of 1995 from San Francisco. So these are the original, like the builders and the original family that lived in the house with 5 children, 5 kids.
It's interesting because when the library was opened above the hill there, above Palmetto, across the street from the house,
Yeah.
there was a photo in the library showing a picture of Sharp Park, I don't know, circa 1900 something.
Yeah, it's very old.
And there's the house sitting in that picture. You could see the house sitting there.
Yeah.
So I knew it had been there quite some time.
Right. So it was a large parcel of land.
Right.
I'm sure, I wish we had an actual picture that showed the house with the land around it at the time and how spacious it was and how there wasn't really much else around it then. At some point in the store was operating on Francisco, the Frisco Market, into the 60s. But then something happened. And from what we know is that the original 6 acres, the city of Pacifica, because the city was then incorporated in 1957, at some point in the 60s, the city decided it needed to build a sewage treatment plant, the first sewage plant for the entire city. And they acquired about 5.5 acres of the total 6 approximately, which only left the 2 houses and backyards for those houses. But the city acquired the property through eminent domain and built the sewage treatment plant, the old sewage treatment plant that's now decommissioned in the neighborhood. So we know that, unfortunately, through the eminent domain and the acquiring of your grandfather's property, it was significant, though, in terms of the city being able to function as a city to build the sewer plant. But that's what happened, and so it was the donation, if you would call it, of the Landys towards the city's building that plant. And then the Frisco, now the store, the small store next to the house, that must have been gone before any construction would start on the sewer plant. But then what happened to the Frisco Market?
Well, there was 2 eminent domains that happened, as I recall, because the first one only brought the store stayed intact from the first purchase from the city. They put the wall up against the store. Mm-hmm. And eventually they ended up taking everything up to the house later on.
Okay.
So the store kept running while the sewer plant was being built when I was little. And the Francisco store, my father was running. He was arrested for off-track betting or bookmaking in the back. And yeah, that came as a shock to my grandfather. They still talk about it in Italy when I go over there because they could barely say the word bookmaking, but my grandfather related the story. But they closed the store. My father had all the legal entanglements that came with the charge. And my grandfather finally got it reopened, and he rented it to somebody later on. But essentially, as a store operating under my father, that was over at that time when that arrest came. Yeah. And he rented the store, and I recall even going over there on my bicycle to collect the rent. My grandfather would send me to, and I don't even remember the guy's name or who it was. I remember being a tall, dark-haired fella, and I'd go ask him for the $600 rent. Wow. And I do remember him sending me back a few times without it, to my grandfather's disappointment. But I think it kind of it broke my grandfather's spirit in the sense that he tried to get things going for the group, and it just didn't take root. Yeah. Yeah. It's kind of a sad chapter.
Yeah. And your grandfather went back to Italy?
He eventually he had some property in the Sharp Park area. He was liquidating that. And at some point, him and my grandmother came to terms that she didn't want to go, so they got a divorce, split whatever they had, and he went back to his native Lucca in the mid-'70s.
Okay. All right. And then you took a couple of trips to Italy yourself, didn't you?
I did.
Okay. And I've
Definitely
got some pictures to share from that.
sentimental journeys both times, of course. But,
So I will go to, hold on, here we go. All right, so we have this one. Oops. This over. Okay.
yeah,
What do you got there?
that's a picture of my grandfather and me
That's in the 70s?
from the left. That's actually 1979 in the summer. I was going to school at the University of Perugia for foreigners, studying Italian there at that time I was a junior at USF, and I took a break and went over there and got to see him and polish up my Italian.
And that's your grandfather in the white shirt.
Yes,
You're standing behind
I'm right
him.
behind him, and the little lady to his left is his niece Delicia.
In the
And
red?
yeah, she's wearing the dark. She's hiding behind the gal in the red, who's her
Oh,
niece. Those are
okay.
her nieces, and that's her daughter at the far left,
Okay.
and
Here.
her son-in-law.
And then here's another picture of you. Here
And
she is.
they still live in that area. That's my grandfather, myself, and Delicia in front of the house in Caponity, where he's from.
All right. And then there's a picture of just you and your grandfather.
Yeah, that's he and I
And Grandpa, Steve and Grandpa.
hanging out there.
And then where's this now? This is a relative, and then you're up in, where are you in this picture?
That's the top of the Leaning Tower of Pisa, when you can still walk up there.
Wow.
And that's Michele Facchino, who's my second cousin's husband. He's still there with Rosella. And he's quite a character. He's a lot of fun.
And then we've got a picture here, and this house is,
That's my grandfather's house he was born in between the goats and chickens running in and out of it at the time. And that's my grandfather standing there. I took that picture for the obvious reasons of keeping a family record. I think it's a great picture. I really love that one.
and there's another nice shot of him in profile and some other.
That's the town elders hanging out. That's a little restaurant that's just a little east of the house. And that's Colognida, Italy. That's a little town called Colognida.
Yeah.
That's his brother. That's Ildo right here. And that's Francesco there. Ildo owned that house there. He was living in it at the time of that photograph. And my grandfather wanted to fix it up, and Ildo wouldn't have him. It didn't have electricity, it had no water or heat in that time.
Yeah.
And he lived in that house like that.
And then here's another picture. I'll show you a picture of the house, and that's what it was in the 70s.
Right.
And then after your grandfather passed, the house passed into.
Well, when Ildo passed away, the owner of the house, his daughter Rosella got it.
Okay.
That's my cousin.
And she was able to do some work to the
Her
house.
and the guy you saw on the bell tower of Pisa with me, he fixed it all up, and it's
And that's what it's like now.
completely modernized.
When
and
was this taken? This was in,
that was summer of 2009.
okay,
Yeah,
2009.
that's the property there.
So that's your grandfather's house now.
That's the house him and all his brothers were born in.
Gotcha. All right.
Yeah.
That's very nice. And then here's your, this is the woman that owns it now. Your
That's my cousin Rosella. And that's my wife Alma, standing with her.
Okay.
And that's the same door where you saw wide open, where my grandfather standing. That's the same side of the house, and you can see it's all enclosed and fixed up.
Oh, nice.
But they have to keep it by law historically the way it was too in the exterior.
Okay.
So everything has to stay original.
That's great.
Yeah.
That's great. And the house, you think approximately how old do you think it might be?
I'll go short and say it's pushing 200 years old.
Okay.
Easily.
All right.
It's just, all that stuff there is very old.
Gotcha. All right.
Could be older.
And your lovely wife Alma is in the picture, and she's wonderful. And you know, I have a story about an Alma too, but first I think I want to show some recent pictures. Okay, so let's see, now that's your grandfather in the store, but I want to show this. We have the which way does it go? Up like this? We have talk about your family here now, your son, and tell us who this is.
Yeah, my son's Antonio. He lives here in Pacifica. He lives in Valleymar. with his wife Sarah.
He was born
This is-
in 19...
He was born in 1983
Okay.
in San Francisco. And that's his daughter, my granddaughter, Angelina Marie Landy.
This is the
she was
latest Landy. in the
August
Landy
10th
clan.
this year, yeah.
That's
I'm,
fantastic.
We're happy to have a young lady in the family. It's long overdue.
Yeah, that's great.
She'll be very spoiled, I'm sure.
Well, one of my favorite stories is how I met your grandmother. And that was, I was living at 2306 when, in that building upstairs, there was an empty lot, and then there was Charlie's house next door on 2260, and it was a turquoise, kind of a turquoise looking house, and with a big palm tree in the front and palm trees in the back. And I always noticed Charlie out there, Renato, the oldest, out there, and he'd be sweeping, cleaning, trimming hedges with a little dog, Lucky. And I would be out front of my place, and on this other side there was another Italian lady living there, and her name was Alma Iannuzzi. And Alma was very, very friendly and very social, an older lady, and she had a boarder named Art. And I found out later on that his name was Art Howard. She had a boarder named Art, and what she did is she befriended me. We would go shopping together, and before we would ever go shopping, we would go next door because she was good friends with Margarita, your grandmother, and we would go into the house, and your grandmother would always say, "You go to the store, bring me back a fat chicken." And that's how I remember. I always said hi to Charlie, but your grandmother always wanted us to return with a fat chicken for her. That's all she ever asked for. And she only spoke Italian, and she spoke to Alman. So she was an interesting lady, very interesting.
Yeah, Margarita never really learned English, and she kind of gave me a bad time when I came back from Italy. I could read and write it, and she couldn't. She never had any formal education.
Yeah, it's amazing
Yeah.
what she did, though, traveling here, with a baby,
And my grandfather, by the way, spoke German and Spanish, and he has no formal education.
Yeah.
So he did what he had to do.
It's truly a success story of immigration and people striving and working hard and coming here and doing something. It's an Italian success story.
It's an American story. I mean, if they come here looking for a better life, and hopefully it'll grab on. And certainly, I wouldn't have anything
Yeah.
that I have if it wasn't for them starting out and
Well, that's
teaching me some of the values I picked up from them.
amazing. Thank you for sharing it, Steve. Well, that's about all the time we have for today. That's about all the time that we have for today. If you want to learn more about Pacifica Historical Society and the many projects, their address is P.O. Box 752, Pacifica 94044, or visit them on the website at www.pacificahistory.org. Their telephone number is 650-359-5462. Thank you very much for watching the show, and thank you so much, Steve, for coming and sharing what a wonderful story and about the Landys.
Thank you for allowing me an opportunity to share.